Hi everyone and welcome back. Welcome to the Intuition and Tarot Foundation class series. This class in the Intuition Foundation series is going to focus on a number of things, but mainly how to tell which are the right tarot decks for you. I'm going to cover a little bit backing up from that question before we really get into exploring hundreds of thousands of different decks that are out there published, and there are literally thousands of very unique decks that you could discover in the world. You might find a tarot deck that you'll never find anyone else owning ever. I've been in that position a few different times, and there are whole museums of tarot decks out there. So we'll look a little bit about why we are focusing so heavily on the tarot as such a big part of your intuitive practice and any self-development, introspective practices. Even if you wouldn't call your practice an intuitive practice, the tarot has uses in many forms of meditation and energy connection and contemplative activities such as writing and journaling. So we'll be chatting about where tarot fits in all of that. We'll be exploring different decks, but the most important thing that I really want to emphasize for all of my Tarot Foundation students in this class is that because you have so many thousands of different tarot decks out there to choose from, doesn't mean that you should be intimidated or put off learning to read the tarot. For a lot of people, the knowledge that there are thousands and thousands of different tarot decks in the world at first is kind of intimidating. So it seems impossible, and a lot of people talk themselves into believing that they don't have enough time to really take up tarot reading in any serious capacity. And I'm hoping that by the end of this class, that will be just a myth wiped from the slate of your brains, because that is just not so. The main thing that you're going to learn in this class is exactly how to interpret any of the tarot decks that you would discover in the world by focusing on just a few key patterns that I'm going to show you today that are there in any tarot deck, no matter what tarot deck you pick up. Sometimes they'll call the 78 cards that are in each tarot deck different names in different decks. No matter what deck you pick up, you're going to be able to read with it if you understand the basic patterns that I'm going to show you in today's training. So it's a very short training, but a very powerful one, actually. In fact, if any of my mastery students have missed these basics, I'll be sending them back to this very same foundation class. Okay, so let's have a look first at intuition and how humans acquire what we call a really good sense of intuition, a really keen intuition. How do you become sensitive to cues from your environment that not even a fraction of the people around you perceive or even claim to be able to perceive? How do you do that? How do you become a highly skilled intuitive? Why would you want to become a highly skilled intuitive, for that matter? Maybe you just want to, expand a meditation practice. Well, there's a value for tarot that really starts to, the more you work on it, kind of blend those two practices, the intuitive practice and the practice of any form of meditation, actually sort of become one and the same after a while when you acknowledge that state of consciousness, the state of calm, detached awareness that a good meditation practice can bring to your body, your mind, your spirit, your day. You get that meditation practice down. What can start to happen is as you lift your vibration from all of the base concerns and stresses that humans can endure in the day, up into the elevated state that meditation can bring you to, you naturally tap into what most people term your intuition or your sixth sense. Because that sixth sense is a more subtle sense. It interfaces a lot with your subtle body energy system. And I talk about that more in some classes, master classes that my mastery circle gets to attend in more advanced studies. But just know that that's what's happening. Your vibration is lifting, and the sensations that you can then perceive when sort of the noise and the chatter of all of the distractions that you may have gotten rid of in something like a meditation practice, all of that fades to the background. And then what happens is you can pay attention to much more subtle cues coming from your sixth sense, coming from your energy body, for your sixth sense to perceive and interpret. And the beautiful thing about being in this heightened place is that you can even transcend space and time, because your energy body and your intuitive senses can perceive through space and time. They can perceive back into the past, forward into the future, across time to different spaces around the globe. So the intuition is an amazing thing to acquire, not because it would necessarily make your life magical in any unhuman way, but just simply because developing an intuitive practice enables us to pay attention far enough in advance, with enough perspective across all times and across all relationships in our lives, that we simply make more informed choices. Our lives develop and mature in more and more successful ways, because from the outside perspective looking in, a heightened intuition can develop such an awareness that you choose so mindfully what you're doing in your life that to other people it might seem like you just have a lot of luck. You have a lot of luck because things always pan out for you, because they always go your way. That's a lot of what the story can feel like, looking outside into a highly skilled intuitive's life. Their life seems magical. It's just because they're making very informed choices. And how they do that is they stay informed by connecting to their meditative, intuitive practice every day. So this first slide I'm going to show you now is a slide that I show when I introduce the concept of mastery of the intuitive sense to my intuition mastery students. Intuition mastery is really comprised of these 4 different things coming together to create a powerful intuitive practice for you. And this is also how you go about becoming a masterful enough intuitive that you can very confidently do intuitive readings for other people as well, by the way. So the 4 components of intuition mastery are, first of all, the channel that the information is going to come through. When you do an intuitive practice, you quote unquote tap in to your intuition. Well, what does that mean? That tapping into your intuition is what this channel part of mastering your intuition is all about. For me, very often I will do a yoga practice before I do my tarot card readings for the day, and that's just an hour or 2 in some quiet point of my day that I take for myself. Every day. You can do an intuitive practice and tap in and do a quick intuitive practice in as little as 20 or 30 minutes a day, really. But where I'm at today, after 20 years of reading, I do spend several hours in my own practices before I begin reading for other people and teaching and consulting. So I just live and breathe it personally. And one of the things that I have found to be an absolutely just surefire way for me to get into the right state to do an intuitive practice is doing my yoga practice first. I've done yoga and Kundalini yoga and Iyengar inspired yoga specifically for over 20 years. And the state that you can attain in a good yoga practice, very similarly to the states you can attain in a good meditation practice or a Tai Chi or Qigong practice, is a state where you feel elevated, your body feels lifted because you have woken up the energy currents in your body. You're then physically a much more perceptive, sensitive individual. And it's when you are in that heightened state that we then get into actually doing the reading itself. So doing the reading itself brings us to this next component of intuition mastery, which is the language. What do I mean by language? What I mean here by language is that your intuition needs a language that you understand to speak to you through. I'm going to say that one more time. Your intuition needs a language that you can understand to speak to you through. Now, this is the vehicle by which the intuition can speak to you best, because without a language that you can understand, your intuition is going to give you sensations, impressions, funny feelings in your gut, things like that, tingling sensations on your back or whatever. And you might be able to interpret these. You might not. You might just go, oh gosh, I feel sort of off or wrong, or I don't know if this feels right, but I'm not sure what does feel right. And it can be very confusing. It's this confusion that scares people with their intuition, because if your intuition isn't having a chance to speak to you and be understood and heard by you, paid attention to so that you act on it on a daily basis, then sure enough, at some point, unless you're a very mindful, conscious person, you're going to go down a path or two in your life that probably, if your intuition had more to say about it, your intuition would have preferred you not gone down that path or not made that choice, right? And then it starts giving you funny feelings and anxiety and things. If you haven't paid attention to it in a while, probably the first way that it's going to get you to pay attention is by giving you a very unpleasant sensation, like anxiety. The more you pay attention to it, the better it feels, and it ends up being a really good thing. The reason that most people don't pay close attention to their intuition is because it's uncomfortable. Big part of getting comfortable is understanding what your intuition is telling you. Understanding what your intuition is telling you is hearing your intuition. It's getting fed by your intuition, feeling good in life and confident in your choices because you fed your intuition some time, some attention. Well, it's really hard to hang out with your intuition if all you're doing is getting vague sensations and feelings. The language is what you need. The most articulate, refined, elegant language that I have ever found that your intuition can speak to you through is the tarot. The tarot is a language of images and numbers and energies and elements. The tool that you use in your intuitive practice is basically the language of your intuition. When you think about it, this is the vehicle that carries your intuition into thoughts and ideas for you to interpret. The tarot is the most elegant of all of those. The other thing that I notice a lot about decks of tarot cards is because they all have 78 cards, it's very easy to compare just right then and there how much detail you're going to get out of a tarot reading compared to, say, an oracle deck reading. Next time you're in your local Barnes & Noble or Waterstones or bookstore, go and see if you have a section where there's a few decks there. There'll be some tarot decks and some oracle decks usually. You'll see that most oracle decks maybe have a few dozen or so, 30 something, 40 something, maybe 50 something cards. I think the biggest I had seen was in the 60s, but that was really rare. Most of the oracle decks I find have 30 or 40 something cards. And there's some really beautiful oracle decks out there. Compare that to 78 cards with the tarot, though, and you already get a sense, I'm sure, that there's a lot more detail, there's a lot more experiences described and explored in the tarot. So it really becomes the most elegant language that you can communicate through. It's also the most widespread language of all of the intuitive tools out there. And because more people speak a language, it gets more frequently used, it gets more frequently asked for. You'll do more readings if they're tarot card readings when you're an intuitive. That's my personal experience. You also have a lot more people to learn from. You've also got hundreds of thousands of different variants of this system that you could learn, versus if you got a specific oracle deck, you could learn how to talk, the language of that oracle deck. You might even be able to attend a workshop or two with that oracle deck's creator. But that's the only real teacher for that oracle deck system probably in the entire world. Okay, so you need the channel to be clear. You need to activate and have a beginning to your intuitive practices. You need a good language like the tarot to bring a reading through with. And then, of course, we have to look at the interpretation of your intuitive reading, and having an accurate system that you trust to help you interpret readings is very important. This is sort of like the training wheels on your bike, being able to interpret a reading properly. So if like a lot of people, your only experience with the tarot has been, okay, there's 78 cards, I have to memorize the meanings of 78 different things if I'm going to learn to read tarot cards, and then I got all the reversals to deal with, so there's actually 156 things I need to memorize, and that's impossible. I can never be a tarot card reader. That's what a lot of people sort of come to when they first look at the tarot. That the patterns are just going to blow that out of the water later on in this workshop for you, for sure. But what really happens there is my system of interpretation, finding these patterns, exploring these patterns, helps you to interpret the language. And you need those three crucial steps to have a good intuitive practice. The mastery of your intuition comes with how often you get to practice those first three steps. How frequently do you do an intuitive practice? Okay, because if you do it once or twice a year, you're going to be only so masterful. If you do it 50 or 60 times a year, you're obviously going to have a degree more mastery by the end of that year. So those are the four components of the intuitive practice that I really preach in the Intuition Mastery Circle to my students. Okay, we already looked at the tarot as a language in a little bit of specificity there. Now, what I think I'm going to go right into from there is exploring some of these thousands of decks with you. I won't show you thousands today. We're going to have a look at a few decks, and as we look at them together here, I'm going to give you their names so that, they're recommendations from me. So, you basically get to window shop these tarot decks with me in the rest of the training, so that's kind of fun. And as you shop for tarot decks with me, I'll point out some of the things that are different about these decks compared to other decks. And we'll talk about these patterns that every single tarot deck in the world has out there. And you'll see those patterns in these decks as well. Okay, so let's get started. Let's start off here by looking at the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith tarot cards. Now, I say Rider-Waite-Smith And not everyone is going to call the tarot decks that have this artwork on them the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. Some people will just call this the Rider deck or the Rider-Waite deck, or there are different variations of this deck from different publications like the Universal Waite and the Radiant Rider-Waite. And the deck's illustrator, Pamela Coleman Smith, on the 100th anniversary of this deck's publication in 2010, we found that there was a special edition of this deck. It was a commemorative deck really highlighting her, Pamela Coleman Smith, because she hadn't really been properly acknowledged when this deck first came out in 1910, when it was just called the Rider-Waite deck. The publisher was Rider. The author, the guy who conceptualized this deck and apparently gave Smith, we don't know how much, but instruction on, her commissioned art. And, this deck was in his name, Arthur Edward Waite. This is a deck that I use in all of my trainings because more than any other deck in the world right now, this one is the base inspiration for many decks' art from this point on. We see people using this Rider-Waite deck of the tarot and taking Pamela Coleman Smith's 78 illustrations and basing their own on those themes. And this enables us to recognize them, especially if we've studied with this deck. Sometimes cards look very different, completely different from the originals. Sometimes they're based on other decks, but more often than not, this is the one that most are based on. So I always kind of start by reviewing this deck, and when you get into my fuller courses, those of you who are in the Mastery Circle or who are students of the tarot courses, you probably have your copy of the Tarot Healing Guidebook that I put together. I've got affirmations in there that I correspond to the 78 cards. The only image on those pages you will notice is that's always there is the Rider-Waite-Smith image, because I want all of my students to be familiar with these images. They're just that dominant, even when you're studying other decks. So there's the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, but what happens with other decks who may look nothing like the original cards? How do you read those? If you like the look of one of those versus a more traditional deck, how do you read with something that looks really different? Well, let's have a look at the next deck I wanted to highlight for you here, which is the Gaian Tarot. As you'll see, her cards look very different when compared to cards from the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. Some of them are thematically completely different. What you will notice here, though, is that a lot of the namings are similar or the same. Let's look at first at the Emperor card. Now, this is a certain type of card in the tarot known as a major arcana card. 22 of the 78 cards of the tarot are major arcana cards. The other 56 cards are called minor arcana cards. Now, the main difference that you can tell right away, no matter what deck you're using, between a major card and a minor card is how they're named. Here you will see there's a big number 4. Compare that to some of her other 4s in the deck that are minors, and you'll see that the minor cards have the word for spelled out, F-O-U-R. On her major, she makes a distinction by using the actual little number. And just studying whatever deck you have in your hand and picking out the major cards and seeing how they look different and are labeled differently than other cards in your tarot decks is something that you should probably do as soon as you get the deck. Just study it with all the cards ordered so that you can discern differences like that you may be looking for. And then, after you've done that, look at the namings of the cards. Now, the major arcana cards have names like the Emperor, the Empress, the Hierophant, the Wheel of Fortune, the Sun, the Moon, the Devil. And so these cards have a big title to them, versus the minor arcana cards of a deck, which are named things like the 8 of Pentacles or the 3 of Water or something like that, or the something of something, the title of the suit, basically, is what's happening there. All of the minor cards have a suit. The suit might be Wands, Cups, Swords, Pentacles. That's what the suits' names are traditionally in the Rider-Waite-Smith decks. But the suits, you should know, are basically all corresponding to elements. Wands correspond to the element of fire. Cups correspond to the element of water. Swords correspond to the element of air, and pentacles correspond to the element of earth. For those of you who like to talk about the element of ether, the etheric spirit energy, a lot of tarot scholars then view the major arcanas as that 5th expanded suit of ether. So there are 4 suits in the minor arcana with those elemental correspondences. Very often, one of the distinctions that different decks of cards will make, and I'll show you these distinctions here in the Gaian Tarot, and then I'll show you another deck of tarot cards that gives these suits different names again. The Gaian Tarot actually just uses the elements names instead of Wands, Cups, Swords, and Pentacles. They call their suits fire, water, air, and earth, the elemental names. And there are quite a few decks that give those elemental names to the suits. Here's one of my favorites that gives elemental names to the 4 suits instead of the traditional names. And that deck is the Osho Zen Tarot. Very, very different again from both the Rider-Waite-Smith deck that we've looked at so far here and the Gaian Tarot. The Osho Zen Tarot has this Zen Buddhist perspective on these 78 lessons that are depicted in these tarot cards. Okay, so you can see how the renamings of the suits are sometimes really quite obvious. If you get that they are these elemental names at their essence, some decks will rename the suits in different ways, but you can usually figure out which suit is which element. Here's another deck that it's been renamed the Shining Tribe deck in its most recent publication, but it was originally published as the Shining Woman deck, and this is a deck by tarot author Rachel Pollack, and it's an offshoot of hers from an authorship and reading and lecturing career. I don't know how many tarot decks she's actually created in her career. She's in her 70s now, I believe. But it's not many. This was definitely a very special, challenging project for her, and she chose to illustrate her own cards. Now, the bit that I really love about this deck isn't so much the illustrations, as it is the fact that they are put together from inspiration from rock art around the world. So what Rachel Pollack tried to do with the Shining Woman and Shining Tribe decks is take the essence of all of the human experiences of the tarot down to their very primordial roots for us as humans. You know, these are core experiences. Psychologists would talk about them having a relationship to our base brain, our lizard brain, our most instinctive level as human beings, is evoked by the 78 images in the tarot. So what is their most basic primordial form? So Pollack looked to cave art to find those roots, and she put those in this deck. Look what she did to the 4 suits names, though. So instead of the fire suit that's traditionally called wands, here Rachel Pollack has the suit of trees. Well, how do those, how do those relate? Well, wands and fire energy are talking about a creative force. We have expressions in the human language like if something really gets you excited, certain West Coast women that I know will say things like, that really lit your hair on fire, meaning that really got you excited. That evoked some sort of creative passion. The creative, passionate element that we associate with the fire element is originally there in the tree with this impetus for growth and development and creation. Right, so Pollock replaces fire and wands with trees. That's one of the most unique, out there renamings of a suit I have ever seen. But I totally get why she did it, and I think experiencing and working with different decks with different namings can really expand your understanding of the tarot generally. Okay, let's look at the other suits that she renames here because they're all pretty interesting. Stones here as pentacles. Pentacles are the earth sign suit. Sometimes people call them coins, but one of the more common renamings of the suit of pentacles is actually stones. I've seen it in a lot of different decks that draw inspiration from more traditional tribal peoples and cultures and belief systems. So stones obviously connect to the earth in a very physical way, and they talk about all the physical material parts of our lives. So that's quite an easy reinterpretation. Water here, usually cups, is renamed by Pollock as rivers, a wonderful renaming that is probably, especially for a lot of tribal people around the world, this is the way that they came to water, especially in desert cultures where rock art has now survived. So rivers make sense as the suit's name in the Shining Tribe deck. And finally, we have the suit of air, which is usually swords in a traditional naming. Here, Pollock has that as birds. Birds are messengers. Any flighted being, traditionally from cultures all around the world, have been seen as the messengers. Think of Hermes in Greek mythology with his wings taking messages to people, and Cupid sending his arrows. And it really emphasizes how much swords and air have to do with messages, right? So I have another deck. Let's put this one on the screen first, actually. Let's look at the Inner Child Tarot by Isha Lerner. This tarot deck was first shown to me by a Waldorf teacher who was a handwork teacher. Art and physical beauty were something that she was very immersed in her work, and it was just a very comfortable deck for her. These images in the Inner Child Tarot to me look like Waldorf teacher paintings, all those beautiful watercolors that they do. And the fairy tale themes in this deck make them relatable to all of us who know fairy tales. They're also, these cards are really big, really just huge cards. And part of what Isha Lerner, the author here, says about wanting to make the cards extra big, I believe, was so that we would really feel like children and have that innocence in our readings when we're reading with the Inner Child Tarot. Because when you think about it, whenever children play with cards, the cards seem very, very big in their hands, right? I also think it's great that she has big cards here because you just get a lot more artwork and they're beautiful. The Inner Child deck replaces the suit of swords with swords of truth. And we get that truth and valor theme coming through as the main lesson that this suit teaches us. It teaches us a lot about honesty and truth and ethics in communication and finding our truth for ourselves. And we see the sword of truth revealing King Arthur, the true king, being revealed by a sword of truth in one of these images. And she kind of takes off from there on that truth angle rather than the messenger and flighted winged being angle. The winged being angle is explored in this deck. And this is one of those things that sometimes it's good to have a teacher handy if you're going to go explore a lot of different decks, just to run things by. A lot of these decks come with guidebooks too, which will tell you which suit is supposed to be which one traditionally. She also has a suit called Butterflies. And the butterflies are actually her reinterpretation of the suit of wands here for a number of different reasons she goes into in her book. And then the other suits that she has here, instead of the watery emotional cups, she has hearts, winged hearts. So she's using the heart as an emblem that most people can relate to emotion. So for a lot of people, working with Isha Lerner's heart suit leads them into a deeper understanding of where the cups and the water cards from other decks are really trying to explain. And then finally, let's see, we've got hearts here, we've got the winged butterflies, which are the wands, we've got the swords of truths, and then instead of pentacles or coins or stones, Isha Lerner's child deck gives us the wonder of crystals. And her pentacles are full of crystals and little gnomes who care for the crystals and play with the crystals and cherish the crystals in that suit. So we get this idea of the preciousness of resources and the gratitude and wonder that the physical world can hold in a really magical way there with that suit of crystals. These are all interpretations on those same 4 suits, though. Hopefully what you're finding now, we've gone through, 3 or 4 or 5 different tarot decks already, is that it's pretty easy to find the corresponding thing. So, of course, then it really means that if you have studied and understood these 4 basic suits with the right teacher, you'll look at the image, you'll see how that deck's artist has interpreted the theme that you've already learned because you've learned the patterns of the 4 suits. The other patterns are patterns of number, and some of the cards in the minor arcana that have numbers but aren't numbered 1 through 10 include the aces and usually 4 court cards. And we're going to talk about the court cards a little bit, because even though they could technically be told, they're technically cards 11, 12, 13, and 14 of a suit, because traditionally there's a page, a knight, a queen, and a king in the court of the tarot. So that's a little bit of an expansion from what people who are familiar with playing card decks are used to seeing. Playing card decks usually just have a jack, a queen, and a king, I think. They don't have a knight as well. So here we've got page, knight, queen, king. These names are renamed by a lot of different authors as well. And the aces are sometimes given special names as well. Let's go back to the Osho Zen deck here for an example on the aces. As you can see here, the ace of wands has been replaced by the ace of fire, and all we see is like a blank diamond and the word source under there, right? And so we have to know that that's the ace of wands. It's just one of those cards that really is very different from the rest. And the court cards here, let's look at the Daughters of the Moon Tarot by Fiona Morgan and see how different the court cards can become from time to time. I'll also show you some, a myriad of decks on the next slide that have traditional namings of these cards. As different as it's ever gotten from me has been the Daughters of the Moon deck. This is as complicated as figuring out the court cards can be. Now, here are the images of some of the court cards from the Daughters of the Moon Tarot. And what I'm going to say generally about all court cards that really saw me through learning how to read with this very unique deck is that I was really grateful that when I learned the tarot, my first ever teacher very simply explained all of the court cards to me this way. She said, all of the court cards basically deal with mastery, mastery of the qualities and lessons of that suit. So all of the fire cards, the wands, have to do with creativity and passion. So the court cards in the suit of wands, no matter what they are, all have to do with mastery of some aspects of creativity and passion in one way or another. Here in the Daughters of the Moon, we see the suit of flames standing in for the suit of wands. Now, mastery of another suit, mastery of your emotions, is the theme of whatever court card shows up in that water suit. And then in, the air sign, mastery of communication, you can see how whether you knew the difference between a queen, a king, a page, a knight, a jack, whatever, a child, or in this deck you may notice that the three different court cards are called maiden, mother, and crone. There are only three of them, and they represent the young, immature aspect. The maiden most closely relates to the child. The mother, I find, has aspects of knight and queen energy, and crone energy has carries aspects of queen and king energy. So she did those differently because this is a feminist deck. You might also see that it's a round deck. A very unique deck, a beautiful deck to work with, also larger. Maiden, mother, crone. Took me a while to study up on what she was actually representing. I needed to actually read her little book there. But when I was first doing readings, I hadn't gotten all the way through the book. I knew that all of these cards looked at some degree of mastering the elements of the suit, and that was enough. I knew that basic pattern. There are patterns to do with what a 2 means, what an 8 means, what a 5 means, and so on and so forth. And we'll go into those more if you stick around and do the classes and the courses that I'm going to show you that we have here on special offer today in just a moment longer. You'll see some of those in much greater detail in those classes and courses explained for you. But let's just finish up here with looking at a few more tarot decks that I just think are absolutely stunning. Here's the one with the arrows, replacing the suit of air or swords. Arrows we find in several decks, but one of my favorite is the Medicine Woman Tarot by Carol Bridges, and she renames the swords arrows because obviously with that tribal theme happening in her cards, arrows were the messengers. They were swift, they could be deadly, and a great reinterpretation of swords there in the Medicine Woman Tarot. I love that deck for so many reasons. I'm sure I'll talk my students' heads off about this deck in some of the master classes. She's got a wonderful companion guidebook that goes along with that deck too. Okay, let's also really quickly, before we leave here, I'm going to show you a deck that a lot of you guys might be able to find in print right now. And that deck is the Shadowscapes Tarot. Shadowscapes Tarot, last I checked, was still at my local Barnes & Noble. I know you can find it online. And this deck is just beautiful artwork. The artist she does a lot of different projects, tarot just being one of them. I like this deck because the traditional names are basically kept for all of the cards. And that makes it a very easy beginner's deck. It's very beautiful. A lot of people just like the sheer beauty of the Shadowscapes Tarot. So definitely wanted to pick that one out for you guys. Another deck that I really think does a wonderful job of taking elements of experience from all sorts of different cultures so that we can learn from everyone's stories, everyone's mythologies, is the Ancestral Path Tarot by Julia Kuchar-Watts. And one of the things that I really love about this deck is some of its renamings in the major arcana. Although there aren't many, the example I'll put on the screen here is instead of the hanged man, we have the hanged one, and it's this baby with the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck. doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to die when he gets born. It just means that he's got to be extra careful and patient, and the doctor's got to pull that cord from around his head, and everything will happen a little bit more slowly with patience and perspective, if we're informed. And those are some of the main lessons of perseverance and patience that we see in the traditional Hanged Man card. We attain enlightenment by looking at things in a different way and not giving in to despondency. But, just that one little shift, the Hanged One versus the Hanged Man, gives us a much more open interpretation of that specific tarot card, archetype 12 of the major arcana. The other thing that Watts does really nicely in this deck is each of the 4 suits shows us images from 4 very different story lines and mythologies and cultures from further back in our past, but from all over different corners of the world. In the staves, which are the wands in this deck of the staves, we see African and Nubian and Egyptian images and mythologies referenced. We see pharaohs and the Nile. In the cups in this deck, we see Arthurian legend, Grail legend, very English looking. And then in the swords, we mainly see Asian sword fighting disciplines and martial arts and contemplation. So the themes there are from another part of the world again. And then sacred circles replace the pentacles in this deck, and we see Native American themes for the most part. So hopefully you've gotten a nice tour of all of the tarot decks out there today, and a lot more knowledge on these basic parts, these patterns that you can learn in the tarot. And if you approach your learning of the tarot from this point of view, where you're just looking for these patterns, you catch on very quickly, but you can explore different decks in this way. And on your own, just in your own practice, the more you read, the more frequently you read, the more masterful you get. And a big part of that is just having the courage to pick up any deck. So in summary, the patterns that are crucial for you to understand, more than it is necessary for you to memorize any meanings of cards. I really stay away from memorization. But the patterns that you really want to have a good grasp on are the patterns that you will find to do with the meanings of those 10 numbers, the 4 or 3 court cards, the 4 suits, and then the major arcana, the 22 cards there. We do a layout that puts them in rows, and it becomes quite easy to learn those 22 cards as well. When we lay them out in a fashion that goes with their numbers, you can almost see every story, every journey of the hero's story that you've ever encountered in those major arcana cards. They're like parts of the story and elements of the story that every heroic story that you've probably heard have, from Odysseus to Jesus to Harry Potter. All of those stories of all of those heroes have the same pieces that the major arcana show us. So it becomes very easy with just a lesson or two to find the patterns in the major arcana cards. In order to fully explore all of these patterns, this is only a few of them, so let's see, we've got number, we've got suit, we've got the majors as their own thing, we've got court cards. So we've basically got 4 patterns that we need to familiarize ourselves with. Easiest way I've ever been able to teach people how to do this is in a weekend workshop format course that I teach called Tarot for Beginners. And it's about 14 to 16 or so hours, depending on if you want to do all the supplemental material or not in the course. Today, I actually have all of those classes recorded in video format with a companion PDF guidebook. And you can press play on those videos and go through them anytime you want when you become a Tarot for Beginners student. It is entirely possible for you to go through them all in the course of a weekend and go from not knowing the first thing about tarot at the beginning of the weekend to being able to very masterfully understand those 5 patterns and read with them by the end of that same weekend. Or you can take your time. You can go through them at your own pace, because when you do get in as a Tarot for Beginners student, you get a link that gives you lifetime access to all of these courses. Also included when you enroll in Tarot for Beginners today is a special private Facebook group for all of my Tarot for Beginners students, past, present, and future. You're welcome to interact in that group, post readings and questions in that group as you go through the course. And that way I can be right there for you whenever you want. I'm on Facebook every day. So that's a great little benefit there, along with the guidebook, the Tarot Healing Guidebook that I told you a little bit about earlier. This is great if you want to just dive in, like I want to recommend all my students do, no matter where in the course you are, and begin to actually do readings for yourself. If you're not to the point where you're confident of your interpretations, if you haven't got through all of the 16 classes that are yours in Tarot for Beginners yet, you can turn to the Tarot Healing Guidebook and reference whichever one of the cards you have chosen in whichever spread. And right there you will find an affirmation that I have created for each of the cards. So let's say if you chose a card in a reading and you wanted that card to basically function as your intuition's advice for you for the day. What if you didn't know how to interpret it? You could go and have this affirmation and you could refer to that affirmation along with the image of the card as you went through your day. And it's a good journaling exercise to figure out what that might mean for you as you go through that day. But that affirmation can give you something to do right away, even if you're not completely familiar with the card in a very masterful way at all. You can use these to do readings for yourself right away, starting today. So that's everything that's kind of included for you there in the Tarot for Beginners course. We also, for people who enroll in the next week or so, for the first 100 enrollments of 2017, actually, we are going to be able to enroll all of our Tarot for Beginners students in the full year of membership in the Intuition Mastery Circle. The Intuition Mastery Circle gives weekly, more advanced master classes to all of the Intuition Mastery students. And what this means is basically once you get through your Tarot for Beginners course, you could be through that course in a day or two if you wanted, you can come and take weekly workshops with me for the rest of the next 12 months. I will be putting a new weekly masterclass in the Mastery Circle for all Mastery Circle members to enjoy every single week. And every single week, those members who actually go through the master classes where I'm teaching different readings, if you actually do those readings on your end of the training, you can actually submit your readings into a special group that the Mastery Circle gets membership into. You can show me the readings that you brought through, and I actually give my Mastery students weekly interpretations and help with their readings every single week for the 12-month period. So there, between the master classes and the supplemental readings every week, even if we just counted each of those mastery workshops as a $25 workshop, which is sort of a standard-ish price for a couple of hours long specialized workshop like that, you can already see that a whole year of membership in that Mastery Circle adds up pretty quickly. It's over $1,000 in membership value right there with that special bonus. And I'm only able to do that for the first 100 to snap this offer up this year. Basically because of that very special attention that I give to all of the Mastery Students members. I want to have adequate time to address all of the reading submissions that get taken and put into that group by our members. So to make sure that I can give everyone that attention this year, I do have to have that limit on here. So if this sounds like a good deal for you, you can see this is well over $1,000 in value here. I'm able to roll all of this in to your enrollment cost today for just the simple price of the very first Tarot for Beginners course, and that is simply $97. So $97 is a brilliant price on this. If you can take advantage of it and you'd like to learn to read with all of those hundreds and thousands of decks that are out there and have a full year of mastery guidance in the circle with me, helping you with your readings all year long, with master classes in special subjects in the tarot all year long, look below this video and you will probably find a Buy Now button. That Buy Now button will be there until we fill these 100 spots. So I'd love to see you in the full course. Go ahead and enroll as soon as you're able to on that to get in as one of the first 100 this year. And thanks so much for taking the time to take this foundational course today.